Okay, it's all going to be about integers, absolute value. So let's talk a couple definitions first. What is an integer? This was actually on the pretest you guys just took last class. Does anybody have an idea what an integer is? Devin?
My guess is that an integer is just like positive or negative, saying if they lost or if an unidentified person lost or gained something.
That's good. Any number, positive or negative, so any number, positive or negative, and 0. So 0 is actually included in the set of integers. So anything we can write as a number is considered an integer, positive or negative. Now, a lot of what we're going to be doing is translating again from English into math. And so what we need to do is start thinking of some of the words that we would actually read that are going to be either a positive value in math or a negative value in math. Okay? So let's start thinking of some of those words that would fill this out. What are some words you can think of that would be a negative? So, minus. Okay? Devin?
Lost.
Lost. If I lose something, that's negative, right? Gian? Or Liam, sorry. Below. Gian? Do I? Divide really isn't a negative. It's just cutting something up. And you could actually gain from dividing, right? If I divide by fractions, I end up with more than I started with. So divide, really, we can't do a negative positive connotation to. Subtract, we could, okay? Yes? Withdraw. Good, that's a money term. There's actually a lot we'll be doing with money and sports. So if you guys can think of some sports terms as well. I don't know if anyone plays football. Yes?
Take away.
Take away. Porter? Rob? Yeah, robbing would definitely be a negative. You ready to think of any more money terms? Go ahead. Withdraw? We already got withdraw in there. Is deposit a positive or negative?
No, deposit is positive.
Deposit. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that in there because that is actually a very important one. So deposit is actually the opposite of withdrawal. Withdrawal, taking money out. Deposit, putting money in. Sean? Debt. Now, there's another word that's really close to debt. You guys know what that one is?
Tax or bill.
Tax or bill. Have you guys heard the term debit?
Oh, yeah.
What is a debit? Porter?
So, I think I might get mixed up. I think when you have like a debit card, pay with money, you get charged a certain amount of money for how much you use that card for.
Okay. I think you're thinking of a credit card, actually. Okay? Because in a credit card, and we're going to throw that on the negative side, a credit card, what basically a credit card is a walking loan. Basically, somebody else has a whole bunch of money, and they've given you a credit card and said, here, you can use my money at any time, and I'm going to charge you if you don't pay it back to me immediately. And normally they charge really, really high rates. So credit cards, a lot of people will use credit cards because they get bonus points or all these other things, the incentive programs that companies put together to do it, which if you're very financially secure and very good with your finances and always keep it at a zero balance may not be bad. The problem is credit cards have ways of charging you money for things that you do. And so a lot of times if you use, especially a credit card, you're actually paying extra money. Now, the other one that you were thinking of is a debit card. or a debit. So in a debit, the difference is, in a debit, it's actually your money. So a debit card is linked directly to your savings or your checking account. And if you use your debit card, it's going to pull the money directly from your account. Okay? In all of these cases, what we're really saying is, how are these affecting our account balance? In other words, is it going up or down? Because if I withdraw, is that really bad? Because now I've got money in my pocket. If I go to the ATM and I withdraw $40, I now have $40 cash. That's a good thing, right? But it's considered negative because it's making my bank account go down. Make sense? Yes? And that would be one of the few gains that's not positive, but you are right. Overall, gain would be a positive.
In math terms, it's a positive. In life terms, it's a negative.
Depending. I mean, there's some guys that won't go to the gym. They want to gain weight. They want to put on more muscle. Okay, what are some more positives you guys can think of? One we missed, we hit lost, but I'm going to put loss here. This is one, especially in football. If I have a loss of 10 yards, is that good? No, it means I've gone back, right? Another one would be penalty. And that's actually both monetary and sports. Penalty is going to send me back. What about positive? Deposit, gain, solo? Add? Yeah. With what? Goal? I'll put that in there. That's not bad. Lydia? Plus? There are people behind you. Porter? You already got gain. Gian? Score? Liam? Oh. Which sport? You don't lose points in golf. You have a low score in golf. Now, if you lose a stroke in golf, that's really bad because it adds to your score. Yes? Receive? I mean, really, guys, on the positive side, you can basically go through the negative list and tell me the opposite word. So the opposite minus would be plus or add. We've already got add up there. Opposite of lost would be. Oh, you did. Okay, lost is gain. Below, above, subtract, add. We've got that. Withdraw, deposit. We already did that one. Take away. Okay, receive. Oh, we did that one. Debt. Reimbursement. And actually, here's one that we want to actually get in your minds. The opposite of a debt or a debit would actually be a credit. What's wrong, Lydia?
Oh, I see. Why is credit on both sides?
Because this is a credit card. But how many of you, I mean, you all live overseas, right? Have any of you guys ever dealt with Amazon or your parents? So if Amazon sends you the wrong thing or you decide to turn it back to them, what do? They actually credit your account. In other words, as soon as you buy something from Amazon, they immediately take your money from you. Okay? Then they send it to you, and when you get it, if it's something you don't want or return to them, the financial term you use is they actually credit your account. So credit's a good thing because they're actually putting money back into my account. Lydia? Refund would also be good. Refund is a form of credit. I see a bunch of hands on our side. Layla? Addition. T? Multiply is kind of like deposit. Multiply doesn't necessarily mean a positive. Positive? Positive. So give would actually be more of a negative because it's going away. Get would actually be more of a positive because that means something is coming in. Porter? Sale. So if it's on sale, is that a positive or a negative? Yeah, that was a little far out. I can't really put that one on the other side. Andrew? What? Up. And actually over here we go down. Below or down. Okay. So that gives us a good list, an idea of what we're talking about on this stuff, guys. I'm not going to make an exhaustive list. There's a ton of other words we could add in here. But you get the general idea. Basically, if something is positive or increasing, that's considered a positive. Something that's bad or decreasing, taking things away, that's considered a negative. Make sense? Now, to actually plot these points, what we do is we plot them on a number line. Our number line is set up. Normally we put 0 in the middle. I say normally because you'll see 0 is kind of a fluctuating thing. Sometimes if most of my numbers are positive, most of mine are negative, I can put the 0 to either side. But by and large, 0 is going to be in the middle of our number line. We write the numbers below the number line, not above it. So when we're doing a number line, make sure your numbers are below it. Our starting point on our number line really is, though, the 0. Regardless if it's in the center or to one of the sides, that's really where we're starting. And as we go to the right, what do you notice about the numbers? They get bigger, and they are positive. What number do we start at? What's the next number?
1 minus 1.
Okay. What about if we go to the left? Then what happens? They get smaller. What number do we start at? -1. And then we keep going by ones, right? These are all our negative numbers. But I like what Caden said. As I'm going left, my numbers are getting smaller. What that means is -8 is actually smaller than -1, isn't it? And that's really our definition, and we'll get to this a little bit later on, guys, as to what number is bigger is if it's further left on the number line, it's smaller. And that's why the more negative a number is, the smaller it is. To actually graph numbers is pretty simple. The big key on this one is you want to make sure that when you graph the number, you place your dot directly on the line. So for example, I'm going to graph -1 and 3. What I'm going to do is at -1, right here where the line intersects the number line, I'm going to put a dot, and I'm going to color the dot in. It's going to be a solid dot. At 3, for the other number, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put it right on the line, and it's going to be colored in. So 2 important concepts on graphing. Point. Number 1 is that it goes directly on the line, not above it. Number 2 is that the dot is colored in. When I color in the dot, it's telling me I'm looking directly at that spot. And you're going to see later on as we do some inequalities, if I have an open circle, it's telling me that number is not actually included. Okay? But for graphing it, we're going to put the dot right on the spot. So I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds. Go ahead and graph those next 4 numbers. Okay, so here's what it should look like. -3, put a dot right on the line here. 5, I put the dot directly over the line here. -2 and 2. -2, I go right here and put the dot. 2, I go right here and put the dot. Again, make sure it's not above the line. When we're plotting points, it goes directly on the line. Any questions on how to graph those points? Okay, so let's talk a little bit more. The sign of an integer is what if the number is greater than 0?
Positive.
Positive. How do I normally show a positive number?
Left blank. Plus sign, and then 1.
by itself. I actually, when it's positive, normally don't put anything. Okay? But we can use the plus sign to show that it's a positive integer. But by default in math, if I do not see a sign, it tells me the number is positive. Make sense? Okay? The sign of an integer is what if the number is less than 0?
Negative.
Okay then? Negative. How do I signify that? A minus sign. Is that always going to be seen for a negative number? Yes. So if the number is negative, I will put the negative sign with it. I will put the minus sign before it. But if it's positive, I'm actually not going to put any sign. Normally. Pretty good so far? Okay. Here's actually one that was directly off your pretest. We had a set basically exactly like this. It said, generate an integer for each situation. And just to hit this, guys, the word is integer. It's not integer. It's not integer. Whatever you want to call it, it's integer. Okay? Straight up. Now, for what we're going to do, and I'll just give you an example, if it says a gain of 17 yards, what number would represent that?
17.
17. Do I do anything else with it?
Nope.
Nope. So that's all you're going to do. I'll give you guys about 30 seconds. Knock out the next 5. Okay, so what did you get for the withdrawal of $67? Lydia? Good. Negative 67. 10 feet below sea level. Negative 10. What about opposite of 8? Negative 8. 2 below par. Devin? Negative 2. 25 feet above sea level. Ethan? 25. Makes sense, right? Okay, I want to take a minute, though, to talk about this piece right here. What's par? Par is golf. Good, that's a golf term.
A par is the average amount of shots it should take you to get it in the hole.
Good. So par is set up by the experts. They say, here's how many shots it should take you to get the ball from the starting point, the tee, into the hole. What is normal par for a regular golf course? Anybody know? No. No. So? No. I'll give you a hint. A normal course is 18 holes. No, it's actually 72. Okay? So most golf courses are designed that it will take you 72 shots to get all the way around it. So if it takes me exactly 72 shots, what number do I use to represent my score? Devin? 0. It says I shot par. Okay? So even though it was 72 shots, I represent it with a 0. If I said I was 2 below par, how many shots did it actually take me? 70, because it's below par. If it was 2 above par, that would be 74. But 2 below par would actually be 70. Does that make sense in your mind? That I would say 2 below, but it actually means 70? It's kind of a weird idea, right? Nope, it's for a course. Par is designed on a course level. So here, this is what we need to start you guys, and we're starting the process of this thinking right now, is you need to understand that 0 doesn't always mean nothing. 0 is actually more of a starting point. It's kind of a floating number out there. And one of the things you have to do as you look at situations is understand what 0 represents. Because 0, again, doesn't always mean nothing. In the case of golf, 0 par means 72. As we're talking about money, 0 change doesn't mean I don't have anything in my account. It means where I'm moving the numbers from. So when I say a withdrawal of $67, does that mean I now owe somebody 67?
No.
No, what it's talking about is this has happened from my balance. So if I started at $100 and I withdrew 67, how much money do I still have?
You didn't lose anything. You just don't have, or you just have 67 less in your bank account.
So how much do I have left in my bank account if I started at 100? 33. Okay, so it just means that my account balance went from 100 down to 33. Does that make sense? But the withdrawal of 67 means minus 67 came out of the account. Okay, good. So that same concept happens when we talk about sea level. How many of you guys live on a beach? So there's only one in here? So, do you ever watch the tides? Does your beach look different between low tide and high tide? Sometimes? Is there a pretty significant difference or not? Okay. Now see, I live down by Baba Beach. In Baba, we've got a reef right outside our beach. When it's low tide, I've seen it at low tide, especially after a couple of typhoons, we get more drastic tides, where you could literally walk from my beach out to the reef and never get wet. When it's high tide, you can't even see the reef. The whole spot looks like it's just ocean. So when I say sea level, what am I talking about? Because, I mean, we're talking about probably about a 10 to 12 foot difference between low tide and high tide. Porter?
Sea level would be where the sea reaches land, like where high tide ends and where next.
So you're saying sea is associated with high tide?
Yes. Because like, can you put a boat, can you swim at low tide?
A lot of times at my beach, no. But at high tide, I can snorkel all the way out past the reef. So here's the deal, guys. Sea level is more of just a concept. It's basically kind of an average between low and high tides, but it's how we measure elevation. So when we talk about sea level, this is 0 for elevation. So if we talk above sea level, that numbers are going to be positive. If we talk below sea level, the numbers are going to be negative. Okay? So don't think of sea level as like a hard and fast thing. It's basically just a reference point for us to start talking about where things are located in relation to each other based on how high or low they are. If it's above sea level, it's positive. Below sea level, it's negative. If I say right at sea level, we use 0 to represent that. Any questions on page 1, guys? Okay, so we've talked about a bunch of different things. Now, let's talk about some real world positive and negatives.
All right, guys, so we're going to start putting these integers into situations. Let's look at the picture they give us. We see 3 people doing different things in our picture. We have one person that says, I'm hiking, so I'm above sea level. Then we have one person sailing, so he's at sea level. And we have one person scuba diving, so he is below sea level. Does everybody see that? What, Liam? So, using this picture and our 3 people, we're going to turn to the next page, and we're going to use the information to answer the questions. So it says the scuba diver is 30 feet below sea level. The sailor is at sea level, and the hiker is 2 miles, or 10,560 feet above sea level. So let's look at the next page. It says write an integer to represent each situation. Well, at the beginning of the lesson, you learned what an integer is. Who can tell me what an integer is? Solo?
Any number, positive or negative.
Okay, so you're going to write a positive or negative number to represent each situation that you saw in your picture. And it also can include 0 if the situation represents 0. Does everybody understand? All right, you have about 30 seconds to write 3 integers that represent these situations. All right, you should be done writing your integers. Who can tell me what integer they used for our hiker? Devin?
2. You said 2 miles.
Okay, positive 2 miles, or just the number 2. Is there another way we can represent that situation? Lydia? 10,560 feet. So this one represents miles. Okay, what about our sailor? How can we represent that situation, Caden? 0. It says he was at sea level, so that is 0 feet. Yes? Because he is not above or below sea level. And how can we represent the scuba diver? Solo?
-30 feet.
-30 feet. Any questions about those? Does everybody see how we got them? Okay. Number 2 says, use an appropriate scale to graph each of the following situations on the number line to the right. Let's talk about what a scale is first. Who can tell me what a scale is when we're talking about a number line? Devin?
Like a grid, graph, number line, literally anything that you can use to visually solve a problem.
Okay, a scale is used on those things, but what is the scale?
Like the, I forgot what I was saying.
Lydia?
I know what you mean. The numbers and the order of the numbers?
Yes, it's the numbers. It's what you are counting by. The scale is what you count by. So this is a vertical number line. It goes from top to bottom instead of left to right, which is fine. And as Mr. Moore told y'all at the beginning, we normally start with what on our number line?
0.
0. And where is 0 normally?
In the very middle.
In the center. So for the numbers above 0 on this vertical number line, are they going to be positive or negative? Positive, because above 0 is positive numbers. What scale can we use to get to 15 feet and 20 feet? Caden? 5s. We can count by 5s. So we already said above 0 is positive, so I'm going to count positive 5, 10, 15, and 20. Now starting at 0 again, what numbers are going to be below 0? The negatives. So starting at 0, what would come first? -5, not -20. You're starting at 0 and you count in order. So then it would be -10, -15, and -20. So A says a hiker is 15 feet above sea level. Starting at 0, where am I going to go to plot his point?
We're going to look up.
I'm going to go up. How many units? Technically 3 on this number line because we counted by 5s, right? And my dot goes on my number line. So our integer for this situation is positive 15. Does that make sense? What integer can we use for below sea level? 20 feet below sea level. Say that? Negative what? -20. So starting at 0, where am I going to go to plot this point?
Go down.
Below 0. And I plot my point on -20. Any questions? Why didn't B say that a diver is -20 feet below sea level? Because that's what we use to represent it. Why didn't it say it like that, Solo?
Because it's already saying that it's like below, so it's already saying that it's negative.
Because below is already saying it's negative. It does not need the negative sign in the sentence. If you use the negative sign and the word below, it's going to cross them out and make them positive. They cancel each other out. You can't have a double negative. So either you use the negative sign or you use the word below, but you don't use both. Does that make sense? So number 3, knowing what I just told you, I want you to read the situation for A and B and circle which one of the sentences are correct for each. So either number 1 or number 2 will be correct. And then I want you to fix the other one that's not correct. Fix what was wrong. Any questions? So circle the correct one and fix the incorrect one. Just rewrite it. Any questions? All right, you have about 2 minutes to do these, A and B. All right, guys, let's look at these. A says a submarine is submerged 800 feet below sea level. So 1 says the depth of the submarine is negative 800 feet below sea level. 2 says 800 feet below sea level can be represented by the integer negative 800. Who thinks number 1 is correct? Who thinks number 2 is correct? Yes, number 2 is correct. How can we rewrite number 1 to make it correct? Andrew? Yes, when you rewrite it, you just need to take off the negative sign. So the depth of the submarine is 800 feet below sea level. It does not need the negative sign and the word below. B, the elevation of a coral reef with respect to sea level is given as negative 150 feet. Number 1 says the coral reef is 150 feet below sea level. And number 2 says the depth of the coral reef is negative 150 feet below sea level. So who thinks number 1 is correct? Who thinks number 2 is correct? More people voted for number 1, and that is right. It only has the word below. It does not have a negative sign. So it is good. Why is number 2 incorrect?
Because it has a double negative.
Because it has a double negative. It has the negative sign and the word below. So just take off that negative sign. Any questions? Sola? No? All right, let's go to the next page.
So absolute value is something you guys should have heard about in elementary school, but unfortunately a lot of elementary teachers teach it wrong. So this one, a lot of times I approach it like we're reteaching and trying to help you understand exactly what this means. Do any of you guys recognize that term absolute value? A couple of you? Okay. So absolute value, the definition is a number's distance from 0. So really all I'm saying is how far from 0 is the number. So it's always the positive form of the number. It is always positive. Okay? So it doesn't matter if the number is negative or positive inside of the symbol. The value is always going to be positive. It's just saying how far from 0 is it. So the way you'll see it mathematically is you can see what we call the goalpost. It's these 2 lines that are written to each side of a number. The way you say that is the absolute value of 4. Okay? So the absolute value of 4 would be 4, because it's 4 from 0. Make sense? Okay? The example below shows how we can figure out your absolute value. So to find the absolute value of negative 9, what we do is we start at 0. I go to negative 9. If I were to plot that on my number line would be right there. I just say how many spaces do I count to get there. So from 0, I would go 2, 4, 6, 8, and then another half would be 9 spaces. So the absolute value of negative 9 is 9. Easy enough? Okay? So we're going to talk about another concept, and this is where a lot of elementary teachers get confused because they approach absolute value like it's opposites, and it's not. Absolute value is always the positive value. The opposite is a number that is the same distance on the other side of 0. Okay? So the opposite, the same distance, on the other side of 0. So, for example, the absolute value of 4 is 4. But the opposite of 4 would be negative 4. Does that make sense? Now, the absolute value of negative 4 would be 4. The opposite of negative 4 would be 4. In that case, it's the same thing. The opposite is always going to be the same number on the opposite side of 0. So it's going to be the same distance. Absolute value is just the distance to 0. So absolute value will always be positive. Opposite is switching the sign from positive to negative. So the opposite of a negative number is positive. The opposite of a positive number is negative. The absolute value of a negative number is positive. The absolute value of a positive number is positive. Okay? So that's why these two things get confusing. You have to understand what the difference is. When I say absolute value, I'm going to put these two signs around it. When I say opposite, I'm actually going to use the negative sign. Okay? So another way to look at negative is to say opposite. So one way to say this would be, what is the absolute value of the opposite of 9? Or negative 9? 9. Okay? So we're going to give you guys a chance. Actually, we'll do these together because these get a little confusing. What would be the absolute value of 5? 5. Because 5 is 5 away from 0. What is the absolute value of negative 13? 13, because negative 13 is 13 away from 0. What's the absolute value of 2? 2. What is the absolute value of negative 11? 11, because it's 11 spaces from 0. What's the absolute value of 7? 7. Really complex stuff, right? Okay? Once you understand the concept, absolute value is really easy. But here's where it starts to get a little befuddling. What does number 6 actually say? If I were to read this in English, Tatiana? Awesome! Opposite of, you missed one thing. What's those two lines mean? There you go. The opposite of the absolute value of negative 4. So what? The way we normally approach these mathematically is we start at the inside. So what's the absolute value of negative 4? 4. What's the opposite of 4? You understand why the answer to number 6 is negative 4.
Oh, just asking for the opposite of absolute value 4.
Correct. It's asking for the opposite of the absolute value of negative 4, not 4. Yes, Liam? Yeah. Okay. So number 7 says, what's the opposite of the absolute value of negative 14? 14. Number 8, how would you say number 8? Anybody feeling brave want to give it a shot? Anybody other than Devin? Kaden? No. You're so close. You missed the same thing whoever the team missed. Solo? Oh! Porter. No! I mean, everybody's hitting pieces of it. Nobody's hitting all of them. Okay, so we'll give you another shot. Lydia. Yes, there you go. You kept adding a negative. So, again, we kind of start at the inside. What's the absolute value of 10? 10, what's the opposite of 10?
Well, wouldn't that mean that number 6 was just before? Because it's negative.
No, because what's the absolute value of negative 4? Do you? Does everybody understand why both 6 and 8 are negative? Is there anyone who doesn't understand why both 6 and 8 are negative? Okay? Now, example 4, now we're going to do the opposite for each number. So what will be the opposite of negative 1? 1. What's the opposite of 4? Negative 4. What's the opposite of negative 7? 7. What's the opposite of 0? 0. So here's another special note. 0 is its own opposite. Okay? So normally, most normal numbers have an opposite. 0 is actually its own because it's in the center. It does. That's why 0 doesn't have a positive or negative sign, because it's not positive or negative. It's actually a representation of nothing. Okay, our next one. Now we use these number lines to help us find the absolute value, to help us understand this concept. Okay? So, finding the absolute value of 3, what we're going to do is we're going to start at 3, and we're going to say, how many spaces does it take me to get to 0? So if I go to 0, I go 1, 2, 3. So the absolute value of 3 is 3, because it's 3 spaces from 0. Make sense? So for negative 5, again, I'm going to graph my point at negative 5. I'm going to start at 0, and I'm just going to count. How many spaces does it take to get to negative 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the absolute value of negative 5 is 5, because it's 5 units from 0. Pretty easy stuff? Any questions? Okay, go ahead and turn the page. We actually only have 7 minutes till lunch, so then only 25 minutes after lunch, basically. So we're almost done with the lesson. Okay, let's go through these instructions really quickly, and then we're going to set you guys free to work. Write an integer to match the following descriptions. In other words, give me a number, positive or negative, that is going to represent what the situation is telling me. On the next part, 2 to 4, I'm going to read each statement about a real-world situation and the 2 related statements in parts A and B. Circle the correct way to describe each real-world situation. It says it could be either A, B, or both A and B. So it might be both of them. Okay? And then the final set, they've given a credit of 35 and a debit of 40 are applied to your bank account. And then 5 different questions to talk about how would we graph that situation, okay? So we're going to give you until lunch to go ahead and keep working on this. We want you to finish off this page by yourselves.
All right, guys, let's go over these. On number 1, you were supposed to write an integer to describe or match the following descriptions. So A says a debit of $40. What integer can we write to show a debit of $40? Solo? Negative $40. Number 2 says a deposit of $225. Layla? Say that again? Yes, positive $225. 14,000 feet above sea level. Caden? 14,000 feet. A temperature increase of 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Gian?
40 degrees.
A withdrawal of $225. Layla? Negative $225. And 14,000 feet below sea level. Lydia? Negative 14,000 feet. All right, number 2, you were supposed to choose which one, A, B, or both, represented the situation correctly. Number 2 says a whale is 600 feet below the surface of the ocean. A says the depth of the whale is 600 feet from the ocean surface. And B says the whale is negative 600 feet below the surface of the ocean. Who thinks A is correct? Okay, who thinks B is correct? A is correct. Why is B not correct?
It's a double negative.
It's a double negative. It shouldn't have the negative sign if it already says below, right? Number 3, the elevation of the bottom of an iceberg with respect to sea level is given as negative 125 feet. So A, the iceberg is 125 feet above sea level, or B, the iceberg is 125 feet below sea level. Who thinks it's A? Who thinks it's B? Good job. It is B. Why is it B?
Because it says it's below, and A says below.
Okay, but what tells us it's below? Gian?
It says that the sea level is given as negative 100.
It's negative 125 feet, so that tells us it's below, right? Number 4, Alex's body temperature decreased by 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Alex's body temperature dropped 2 degrees Fahrenheit, or B, the integer negative 2 represents the change in Alex's body temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. Who thinks it's A? Who thinks it's B? Who thinks it's both? It is both. Both are correct. Because it says the integer negative 2. If he decreased by 2 degrees, how would you write that as an integer? Negative 2. So the integer negative 2 represents this change. Yes? So that's correct. All right, a credit of $35 and a debit of $40 are applied to your bank account. And you were supposed to answer the questions about that credit. So let's look at A. What is an appropriate scale to graph a credit of $35 and a debit of $40? Who remembers what scale is? Other than Devin. Lydia? Why fives? Good job. So you would count by fives, or you would use a scale of 5. Remember, a scale is what you are counting by on your number line or on your graph. B, what integer represents a credit of $35 if 0 represents the original balance? Devin?
35.
35, just positive 35. What integer describes a debit of $40 if 0 represents the original balance? Gian?
Negative 40.
Negative $40. D, based on your scale, describe the location of both integers on the number line. Where would we find $35 and negative $40? We're counting by fives. So how many spaces would it take us to get to 40, negative 40 and 35? Gian?
It would take 7 jumps forward to get to 35.
Use another word other than forward. Is it to the right of 0 or to the left of 0?
Right.
7 spaces right of 0. Okay. And what about negative 40?
8 spaces to the left of 0.
Yes, it is 8 spaces to the left of 0. And E. What does 0 represent in this situation? Stella? Kind of. It does represent $0, but I want a different description. Sean? The original balance. And it told you that in B and C, if 0 represents the original balance. Before any change was made to your account, 0 represents that original balance. Does that make sense? All right, let's look at the next page. Everybody ready? All right, so we talked about integers. We know they are positive and negative numbers. We've talked about absolute value. So which two integers would give me an absolute value of 12? Andrew? Negative 12 and 12. Why do they both have the same absolute value? Because negative 12 is 12 spaces to the left and positive 12 is 12 spaces to the right of 0. They're the same distance away from 0. What is the value of this expression? Think of each negative sign as opposite of. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to think about that and see if you can decide what the value of this is. Melanie, if you stare at it any harder, maybe. T, what do you think the value is?
7.
Why 7?
Because it's the opposite of negative 7.
Good job. She said this means the opposite of the opposite of the opposite of negative 7. Another way you can look at it is each two negative signs cross each other out. So these two would also cross each other out, and all you're left with is positive 7. Any questions? All right, you're going to do this one. What you're going to do is read A, B, C, and D, and you're going to plot them on this picture. Where would A be? Where would B be? Where would C be? And put them all in that picture in the place that they belong. And then you're going to answer questions 6 through 10 based on those situations. Any questions? I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to do this.
Okay, this one starts, guys, by drawing where your points were to help you out for the rest of it. So point A, I climb 6 feet up the mast, so that's going to be somewhere up in here. B, dove 6 feet under the water, so it's going to be about that same distance, but on the other side of the water. C is at the water surface, so that's right where the boat meets the water line. And D is going to be 3 feet snorkeling, so that's about halfway between C and B. So in which situation will we at the lowest? Caden? B, pretty obvious, right? Especially if you made the dots in there. Which one will be the highest? Lydia. Hey, which situation has the same absolute value if you were 6 feet underwater? Devin?
A and B.
I would actually put both. Because even though it says 6 feet underwater, that is the same value. Which situations have the greatest absolute values? Jan? A and B. So A and B was listed twice. Now we're going to plot all of them. Another big thing on the plotting, make sure you put which point it is. So A, we started with A, was up here at 6. So you draw the line directly on the line, or the dot directly on the line. You put an A above it. B was 1 at -6, so at -6, again, draw the dot right on the line. Letter goes above it. C was at 0 at the C line, C level. And D was halfway between C and B. So she went right there at -3. Any questions on those? Pretty simple, right? Okay, the next one gets to be a little bit of a trick question. So they're playing a game where the object is to get closest to 0. So which of those numbers was closest to 0? Gian? Or Liam? So Alicia was the winner. Okay, what two numbers have an absolute value of 6? Devin?
6 and -6.
Good. 6 and -6 both have an absolute value of 6. Any questions on that page? Okay, so turn the page. Here's the first page of your homework. Okay, determine which number is closer to 0. You can use the number line to help you. You don't have to. Basically, just circle or underline or cross out the number that's further away to demonstrate which one is closest. This one gets a little bit interesting. Write the opposite of each situation. So my recommendation would be, on the left side, write the integer for the situation, and then it'll make it easier to do the opposite. Huge hint for your test, because the quiz that we're going to have in about 2 weeks is based on this chart right here. And this was one of the most missed, because kids wrote the integer instead of the opposite. And then there's another chart where they had to write the integer, and they wrote the opposite. So pay attention to the directions. Caden?
So the last one is the first one. E, the first one. Do we circle both of the numbers?
Are they both the equal distance away? I'd circle both of them. Okay, the next part, find the absolute values of each of them. Those, there's no real tricks in there, no negatives on the outside. That should be easy. And then 1 and 2 do take some thinking. So you have to think about where they're at on the number line and what's going to happen to them. Okay? Go to the last page. Find the opposite of each number and describe its location on the number line. So it describes the location of the opposite, not the actual number that's written. Does everybody understand that? Okay, write the opposite of each number and label the points on the number line. So on my number line, I'll do part A for you. Point A says it's the opposite of 9. So the opposite of 9 is going to be -9, so that's my answer up here. Then on the number line, at -9, when I plot the point, I put it on the number line, and above it, I'm going to put A. Makes sense? So you do that with the rest of those. Number 3, study the first example. Write the integer that represents the opposite of each real-world situation. In words, write the meaning of the opposite. So, in Adam's positive charge of 7, what integer represents the opposite of that? -7. So, in real-world terms, what would I be saying?
And Adam's opposite, or negative charge 7.
Excellent. And Adam's negative charge of 7. Does that make sense to everybody? Do you understand what the requirement is for this problem? Okay. Do the same for the rest of those. Number 4 and 5, pretty easy. Remember the difference between credit and debit. If you have forgotten, they're listed on your positive and negative chart at the beginning. And then label 40 below and 40 above. So take note of the intervals that they gave you and think about that as you're drawing where they would be. Any questions on your homework? Okay, so those last 2 pages of the homework, we were able to get everything else done in class. And good news is